hello, welcome to the October Gallery, and thank you all for coming on this very hot day. We were told that 60 people had booked, so we were expecting a huge crowd, so if you want to get a bit closer, that's all right. I think the good weather has probably kept some people in the park. I'm Gerard Houghton of the October Gallery, Elisabeth Lalouschek, the artistic director of the gallery, and Mike Ward from Factum, Arte, who is a printer, and please just jump in at the front, buddy. And we're going to be talking about Anatsui's latest series of works. And we'll get a clip for you. Fairly soon.
Delicate flower.
I'll talk to Elisabeth in the meantime, so don't worry. So thanks very much for coming on this warm day. Anatsui is becoming more and more known. I think that's easy to say. And I want to thank Elisabeth, really, because Elisabeth, as the artistic director, has put together this show of... Can you imagine?
Yeah.
One second. I'll talk and get your mic up at the same time.
Sorry, I'm such a Luddite about these things. No booze and pop star. Great.
Got you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Brilliant.
Open channel through.
Yeah.
Okay. Anatsui. We've been working with Anatsui here at the October Gallery since 1993, I think. And I want to really begin with Elisabeth and say, to get her to tell us how you first came across Anatsui, because I know it was you who was blown away by something he did once.
Yeah, so when I first, can you hear me? Is that microphone working?
Yes, it is now.
Working. When I first came across Anatsui, it was in this corner of the room, just in the back there. We ran a little film on a video screen, not the same one, a little bit more old-fashioned than the current one. And I saw Anatsui burning a huge log of wood and sawing into it with a chainsaw. So I really was excited by the energy of this work and wanted to find it. I think if you look at one of the wooden works in the back room, that's from 1989, it's the kind of burning and scorching and chainsaw marks that I might have seen, but except on a big wooden log. It was quite difficult to find him at that time because there was no internet there. You couldn't just type in somebody's name and say, hey, where are you, how are you? I had to actually throw out the word. And the word gradually came back round to me, and I found a little note somewhere stuck on the wall here at the gallery that said, please call this gentleman, and he has works by Lalouschek. So that's how I first came across him, found him in 1993. We invited him to participate in a group show, which he did, and then we presented a solo show of his work in 95. It was the day of letter writing. You know, you would write a letter, it would be hand-carried to Nigeria. It took about 3 months, and then somebody hand-carried the letter back to you. So that were the lines of communication at that time. Yeah. But things still worked pretty smoothly.
Things worked very, very smoothly. So Elisabeth and the gallery begin to have this relationship with Elle, and he's really, at that time, he's known for his wooden sculptures. Burnt, chainsaw, mechanical tools. That was what Elle was really using. There is, if you go out into the courtyard, there's a complete tree trunk which has been sawed in half, and that's very much Elle of the 90s period, together with these wooden works on the walls in the far room. Elle sees himself, always saw himself as a sculptor, and I think that's worth in the beginning saying. That Elle was a three-dimensional, he was a sculptor. That was what he did. He sculpted in all kinds of different materials, concrete, wood, and then he begins to get metal as part of... Elle was always working with materials that he found, particularly in the local environment in Ghana and Nigeria. He ends up in Nigeria. For example, he found milk tins, carnation milk, that kind of thing. There were thousands of milk tins being drunk in Nigeria. People would just throw the tins away. So there were these middens or rubbish tips full of milk tin cans. So Elle thought, well, there's a material that the environment has thrown up. I'll start to work with those. And he begins to sew the milk tin cans together. And then he works with cassava graters, the local food staple, metal, punctured through with nails, to give you a grater. Very simple graters, cassava, the local staple. And in the other room, you'll see sculpture made with cassava graters. And these behind you, these things on the wall behind you, that's the size of your standard cassava grater. It's a piece of metal taken a nail, and the nail just punched through. And so you get this sharp edge on the other side, and that's what the cassava would be grated upon. They're used for 10, 15 years, and then they would throw them away because they were old, they'd lost their edge, and they'd make another cassava grater and start again. So Elle would go around collecting things like that, and things like mortars, the wooden mortars you'd use to make whatever, big mortars, small mortars. And from those he'd make figures of wood that were part of Elle's sculptural repertoire. The things begin to change when he comes across in the bush in 98, 99. He comes across 3 plastic sacks that were from a local liquor store. They couldn't recycle aluminium. They recycled metal, they recycled all kinds of things in Nigeria. But there was 3 plastic bags full of aluminium bottle tops from whiskey, brandy, all the big heavy drinks. And the local liquor store would collect the tins, recycle the bottles, and they chucked them into the bush. And Elle found 3 plastic bags full of bottle tops. What to do? So he takes them back to his studio, and over the years he begins to think, well, okay, I can cut them and flatten them and sew them together and start to make larger sheets of them. And that was when Elle became the bottle top maker of these standard works. And the big work, of course, in there is a work made with bottle tops. And that, the first time he showed them was 2002?
Was in 2002, yes. And I know you're referring to a big work, but that is his smaller size. Just to put that in context.
Yes. Yes. You know, they've got bigger.
3 meters.
They got the first 2 cloths stood on this wall. Okay, and Elle was thinking in terms of sculpture again, and he thought, when he came, I remember he said to Elisabeth, maybe we hang them down the centre of the gallery so that people can walk around them, because he saw them in sculptural terms. And Elisabeth, I don't think she wanted people to come into a gallery and just see that. He didn't want the gallery changed in that way, I think.
It's a telephone conversation we had, but when he came here, I actually wanted to hang them on the wall. So we hung them with some folds and undulations, and that exact formation was then carried on to the British Museum. So if you visit the Africa galleries, man's cloths, you will still see hung in exactly the same formation. Because it was a new thing, nobody knew quite how to treat it. People didn't realize they could change and reform it. So the British Museum built a frame that imitated the folds we had created, and these exact folds are now hanging, you know, supported by this metal frame behind in the British Museum. So it's in a sense, it's wonderful, because you have that kind of, that work of that time, you know, it looks exactly like it did at the time, except it hangs just across the road, which is wonderful. But you know, it's that freedom of movement, that freedom of creation, you know, to give that creative power into other people's hands that excites Elle, you know, so you can get other dimensions into the work wherever they go.
So Elle's idea, I think, ultimately is that each time the work is hung, it's a different work. That would be what he was hoping to allow to flourish. Every time you take the work down and put it somewhere else, it's a different work. In fact, you can even take a cloth and turn it round and hang it in the other direction. It's a different work. The reverse side and the surface side are entirely different pieces. And he's quite happy for that to exist. I think that becomes very interesting when we start to talk about the printing. So Elle has worked for the last, 2002 to 2017, Elle has basically been making bottle top pieces for 15 years. And he's become known really for his bottle top pieces. And if you say Anatsui today, most people think bottle tops. And very few people realise that he's a wooden sculpture, he's a concrete sculpture, he's a milk tin sculptor. He's a sculptor in all these different media. And I've always thought that El was beginning to feel, after 15 years of making bottle top pieces that sold all around the world and that are very, very well known, I've always been feeling that he's been caught by his bottle top pieces. So how long ago was it when you were
So
in
in
Madrid?
2015 it happened that Anatsui was in Barcelona, and I had at that time heard of Factum Arte,
Heard of them, I thought you were working there.
of Factum Arte, the big dream factory for artists in Madrid, where a huge studios complex where they can make artists' dreams come true. Whatever dream that may be. They work with Anish Kapoor, they work with Marina Abramovich, they work with Anthony Gormley, I think.
Well, with
maybe.
Dylan Smith, that.
Exactly. So they put an idea into a physical reality. So, which is quite wonderful, and I wanted Elle to encounter that. Just to run through there, see what new ideas might come up, see what could be made. And the great thing about Factum Arte is that it both runs on a sort of very highly technological level, where people create machines, like 3D scanners that look hugely handmade. So it's the handmade and the technological that meet in that extraordinary setting. So I made an appointment with Adam Lowe, who is the director of Factum Arte, to go and visit with Elle. It happened that I'd gone to college with Adam Lowe without me knowing many years before at the Royal College. So we met again in Madrid, and we just made a big tour of that place. And then we all had lunch in a vegetarian restaurant, and because that's it was a preferred diet of Elisabeth's. And we started talking about the processes, the many different ideas, and we got caught on the idea of the tabletops that had been pierced for so many years by his assistants. And Adam got very excited about the idea of potentially bringing those pieces to Madrid and then starting to experiment with them, maybe 3D scan them and print them up or do things with them just to see what they would, to bring that historic material from Nsukka, Nigeria, where it operates, to Madrid and do something else with it. So this is what happened.
I want to move then to Mike. What was the first time then that maybe Adam Lowe talked to you and said, do you know Elisabeth's work?
Yeah, Adam said, "Do you know Elisabeth's work?" I said, "Yes, I do." It's very hard to miss, The whole sides of buildings, half a street in Boston. The Reichstag. Was it the Reichstag?
No, the
National.
Oh yeah, it wasn't the Reichstag. Yeah, but I mean, it could have been.
It was close.
And yes, I'm aware of Elisabeth's work. I've never met him. I haven't overly studied him, but it's clear that it's a fairly substantial chap to deal with,
So what did Adam say?
Adam said to me, he said, "Well, do you think you'd be happy to do some experimental work?" I said, "I'm more than happy to do experimental work. For 40 odd years, I've done work where you try and know what you're going to get at the end of it. It'd be quite nice to spend some time doing something where you haven't got a clue what's going to happen, and much more enjoyable in many ways, and a little like going back to foundation course, But so yeah, I was very happy, and when I said, "But are you expecting me to work directly from the pieces of wood? Because it's possible with certain methods, but it's not. It's limited because they're thick pieces of wood. They are bendy pieces of wood. They would powder in the etching press, so they would completely be destroyed unless we do something very delicate." Which that one on the end actually is. That actually is directly from one of the pieces of wood he sent us.
So
and it is very delicate, but that's been the one that we've used for that method because it was so large that it wouldn't have gone through the press anyway.
Okay.
So we thought it would be interesting to do the direct printing method from that.
So tell us about that direct printing method, because I mean I'm not a printer, I don't know, but it's a black art, I think. Now,
Well,
that's very different, isn't it?
I mean, I'll just briefly say that, then I'll go back to the other story. But that print is there was a piece of wood exactly the same size as the coloured area of that, as part of the collection of the lumps of wood sent to us by Anatsui's studio. Some were small, quite a lot smaller than that, and they're fragments, because I think in many cases the people working on the battering and stabbing of these little pieces of aluminium to produce those huge drapes, I think a lot of it happened across their knee, or it happened on a bench top where they were, bashing, and then they'd turn over the piece of wood when it got so fractured that they couldn't any longer get what they needed from it. So in this case, it was quite a large piece of plywood. And you can see that it's kind of delaminated in some areas, and delaminated through another ply in other areas, and again through yet another layer in other cases, and round the edges it's got more fragmented than in the centre. So it's become a textural landscape, in fact. And we thought we certainly want to print from that, but without destroying the actual lump of wood itself, because in a way they're relics we'd like to hang on to for a lot longer, for all sorts of reasons. In one of which may be that they get recycled into a piece of sculpture, or continue to make permutations of prints that haven't yet been made. But in this case, we had to come up with a method that wasn't to do with going through an etching press. So this is an old Japanese method of printing, which is the takohon, which is basically you lay a piece of thin Japanese paper, thin being the operative word, so that it's thin enough to get pushed into the rises and falls of the surface. And it's dabbed, basically. So the colour that you see there, the carmine colour, is an ink on a slab with a dabber. You basically a sort of stick with a pad on the end. You dip it into the ink and you knead it into the surface of the paper, which is covering the surface. So you're not damaging the actual piece of wood at all. It's not in contact with the ink at all. It is just offering its relief up to the reverse of the paper. So you're kneading it in. So it's not a rubbing, like a lot of people might have done brass rubbings or coin rubbings. It's similar, but not. It's a dab, and with pressure rather than a rubbing. Could do a rubbing, but we didn't. We did a dab. Anyway, that's that. But the other pieces of wood that were sent to us, which were all gloriously textured and different shapes and battered and tattered. One of which is behind the other side of the wall of that aluminium plate on the wall there. Became very, very highly textured, and they came to Factum Arte in a lovely crate from Nigeria. We opened it up with huge excitement, and then that went to our department that scans things in very high resolution, 3D scans. Things. We've done it for all sorts of objects, from Tutankhamun's tomb to the various Assyrian sculptures that have been in huge danger of destruction, and some which have since actually been destroyed. Historical, but in this case, contemporary objects with their own history, as by the way, in brackets, with their own labour history, artistic history, but nonetheless contemporary objects, 3D scanned and then turned into information that could be engraved, or to be more accurate, routed into aluminium plates as per that piece on the wall there. So all that textual information was translated from 3D scanning through a computer, which drives a router, which literally just goes for hours and hours and hours and produces the texture. So it ends up like an etching plate. So then it becomes familiar to me, because that's my history. I'm from a traditional printmaking background, and once it comes into my studio in Factum Arte, it then becomes an object from which you can produce many permutations through different printing methods, different layerings, different papers, different colours, different kind of wiping of the plate, different kind of rolling of the plate. So permutations were then possible. And we had a plate for every single piece of fragment of wood that was sent back and front. So in the case of a black and white series of prints we've done from the plates, there's a print, sort of positive and negative in a way. There's a print from the roll-up of the surface, whereby you have a hard roll and you roll across all that texture and it just picks up what's high. And then we've done a series where the ink was rubbed into the grooves of the plate, which is called the intaglio of the plate, the below the surface information. It's called intaglio. And that's then rubbed into the plate and then wiped off so that the surface area is left clean and the grooves are left full of ink. Then paper that's dampened so that it's made supple is laid across it, and it goes through an etching press which under quite high pressure, which then pushes the paper into the grooves of the plate. Whether it's a roll-up or intaglio, it will still take the relief of the plate, the texture of the plate, so it will either be in positive or negative at that point, whether it was a roll-up or an intaglio print. Is that a bit confusing?
No, I think this is.
Is this so?
No.
I will elaborate.
This is one of the
I don't want to waffle, but I don't mind elaborating.
It's one of the fascinating things, because Factum Arte is known for its technological advanced systems. They are recreating whole walls of Italian frescoes that are disappearing, that are breaking up, and they're recreating these massive 3D objects. So highly technical.
Sure.
3D scanning, all the modern things. They're at the cutting edge.
Absolutely. To the point of the texture of a hair that happened to have landed on. I mean, we recently, about 3 years ago, installed a facsimile of the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings, down the road from the real one, because the real one is in danger of
being breath, isn't it?
Yeah, it's people's breath and flash photography and sweat, human exposure to something that was never intended to be exposed to humans. It was supposed to be buried and closed and locked up for the rest of its existence. But Howard Carter, in his wisdom in whenever it was, when was it? 1901, thought that a pickaxe would be an appropriate way of exposing this to the rest of the world. And since having done that, the tourism has totally destroyed the real tomb of Tutankhamun. It's still there, but it's tatty, it's fallen to bits. So we were asked, well, not me personally, but Factum Arte as a company were asked to, with their skills and wisdom, to make a facsimile of the tomb. And it is, I was there on the installing of it, which was a great pleasure, because quite a lot of people, we all have our separate skills in Factum Arte, we all have our sort of thorough wisdoms about some things, but sometimes there are certain projects whereby we're recruited as kind of basically sensitive artistic labourers. And this was such a job, they needed a bit of sensitivity and a bit of beef at the same time. So you're lifting great big girders and saying, oh yes, well, it would be so nice if it was just a little to the left. Basically you're labourers, but with a sort of, hopefully there's some sort of subtlety. And so I was on the installation of the job of this thing, which was great. But I noticed that there was in the scan, it came as sort of prefabricated portions, round about the size of that big thing behind you, and they could then be pieced together, fitted together from behind with a sort of sort of scaffolding network, really, and then enclosed and eventually, in terms of like a sort of theatrical stage set, really. But in the end, from the inside, when all the outside is then sealed up and the roof's put on and it is exactly the same as the real thing. Absolutely, unbelievably accurate. To the point that I noticed in one corner, a kind of when sellotape is stuck to a table and you don't notice it. You don't notice it for years and years. And then gradually, maybe it gets a little grubby around the end. It attracts a little bit of grubbiness around it, and you can see the outline of a piece of sellotape, and a piece of sellotape that had been cut off on one of those kind of tooth, those little machiny things, and there was a sort of serrated edge one end, and somebody in 1930 something had put some sort of colour swatch on there to repair a bit very badly in 1930, whenever, really rather crudely, and a piece of sellotape had got left in the real tomb, and when we as a company went to scan it, this piece of sellotape is still there, so it's there in our facsimile. So it's complete. I just spotted that. I thought, God, that's how accurate we are. That's amazing. Because it didn't see through it. It was there. It was. Anyway,
one of the things that fascinates me is that you talk about this really very, very complex technology, which there are experts in that world.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to you in the print shop.
Yeah.
With Factum Arte, you talk about sensitive beef. You'll forgive me if I say.
Yeah.
The printing is about materials. It's about sensitive beef, very sensitive beef.
Yes.
But one of the things that always fascinates me is that when you talk about an intaglio, you're always talking about accessing the information of the depth of the print, or accessing the intaglios. You're talking about accessing data. And it's a very technological in a sense, but it's a very old technique.
Oh gosh.
So you're mixing both these senses, because you're talking about data here, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, in the sense of how that plate was made, they got the people that do the 3D scanning and then translate into information.
Information, there you go.
That can be, I know, I'm using
it's fascinating.
I'm sort of borrowing their language in a way, because it wouldn't normally be mine. Where it then becomes something, they call that a depth map.
Okay, yes.
I don't call it a depth map, I call it an etching plate. But it wasn't etched.
Yes.
So it isn't an etching plate. It wasn't used, acid has not been used to various degrees in various strengths to make some bits deeper than others and some bits lighter than others. And an etching plate you could get an etching plate to look like that with acid, but it would come through a fairly serious, seriously complicated series of sessions in the acid to get it to that. And probably wouldn't be as sort of photographically accurate as that is. I mean, this is about. It's sort of about reproducing something and then almost unreproducing it, using that as the basis from which to then go bananas, So
so you get
that
these
is not
things.
etched. That's routed.
That's routed.
Yeah.
So you get these plates, and then you go bananas.
Yeah.
And then you get Elle to have a look at it.
Yeah. And,
so
and
what are you thinking when you start making all this?
I'm thinking permutations. I'm thinking offering suggestions. I'm thinking, what if we do this? I'm thinking, let's try this. It might not work, but
so you still haven't met Elle, have you?
Oh yeah.
You have met
at this point.
Yeah, at this point.
No.
When you open the box, Howard Carter moment.
Yeah.
Oh goodness me! I see wonderful things.
Yeah, all these treasures. Yeah.
You're not thinking Tutankhamun.
No, but no. I hadn't. No, at this point I hadn't met him. No, so I didn't know
who or what you were going to.
Whether I'd looked at his work more thoroughly by this time, so I had a sense of his colourway, the sort of colours he enjoyed using, and textural kind of references. But basically, I think I had the feeling from those that asked us to do it that there was a certain trust implicit in the whole thing, so that we know how to do this stuff. He doesn't necessarily know how to do it, but here's his source material. Go and play, and then we'll talk about it later. Which is sort of how it worked. So off I go and use my skills, whatever they are, to chuck it around a bit, really, and just sort of come up with various permutations. And I thought, what if I do that? And then you make a few mess ups, and you think, this is something about Printmaker I've always partly professed in a way. I've done some teaching in art schools and things like that, and people ask you for actual technical information. And I say, well, yes, there's a lot of actual there is a lot of actual technical information, but you're artists, so chuck it around, and if you make a terrible mistake, it may be a wonderful terrible mistake, or it may be one that you think, yeah, maybe not this time, but keep it in your head for maybe next time, you know, and things cross over. I mean, literally in printmaking, things cross over, and it's about layers. So literally they do, but also intellectually they do. So you as an artist that deals with printmaking, I think, is often aware of the serendipitous sort of nature of it.
I'm going to come back to serendipity.
Okay.
Elizabeth, you turn up with Elle. When is that? So you take Elle back to the studio.
Last year we did our first visit. This is after Mike had started to tackle the subject, and we arrived there thinking we would see a number of prints that had been made. We arrived in a room which was about twice the height of this room, about 8 times the size of this room,
Nice
and half of this was covered with prints. So we walked in, and you're obviously trying to look at everything at once. So after looking at it for about 2 or 3 hours, and knowing we only had about 3 days to dig through the material, I was trying to get some sort of focus, but of course, the more you worked with it, the more possibilities appeared.
Well, somebody suggests the next thing, which
exactly,
then you go off track, and then think, oh, better back there.
So I think you could only experience it the first day, without actually knowing what line it was going to take or what direction it was going to take. We spent a lot of time taking all sorts of sweets, different yellow sweets, and hanging them up on the wall. And whenever you pulled out one, another 10 appeared magically from somewhere else.
Sorry about that.
So it was great. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think it was on the second day that we then, after you kind of sleep and digest all of this information a little bit, so you come refreshed in a sense to the place. And I think it was at that time that we started playing with different formations of, cutouts of wood, wood samples on the floor that kind of resembled a little bit the wood reliefs. And we started playing a little bit with what became later the Eclipse Suite, this particular body of work. Because
of
we
which
had,
there are 13, by the way. There's only,
about 5 here.
There are actually 13 in the end.
So those were on the floor, and then we started playing with circles that had been cut out. And
So the circles begin because it's a circular.
The plate we have that produced these images. Yes. It's the same material as that. It's an aluminium plate. It's as deeply routed as that where necessary. But it's that's the back of you see the silver one there, and the gold one with that little dotty bit on one side. That's the reverse of it, and the front of it got a lot more action, and that's this one. Okay. So this has got both. That's the reverse. So basically it's a tray. Well, it's the same size, exactly that size. Yes. So it's a lump of wood, and it's quite thick. Yes. And it's on one side. It's got this kind of. It may have been a table at one time, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's a wooden tray.
I think it's a wooden tray.
One of market trays.
One of the things, about Elle is that one of the things that fascinates me about these is that Elle actually begins when he leaves Ghana and goes to Nigeria. One of the things he's making is wooden trays. He gets the local carvers to carve wooden trays and to put patterns on them for him. But he gives them, I want this pattern, I want this pattern. So actually Elle begins with wooden trays, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he's very early.
The first exhibition in Nuzuka.
His first exhibition
was wooden trays. Again, with scorching was one of the methods.
Scarred in. With but adinkra symbols from the African alphabets, if you like, scored into these trays. And he's using these wooden trays, which are everyday objects. He's using them as his canvas for his very early works. So I find it fascinating that we're back with wooden trays in some sense. Yeah. So the reverse side would also have been used at some stage?
Well, I mean, this one doesn't have any stab marks on it at all.
That's no stab marks.
But we thought we're doing the reverse in the front of everything, so we'll do the reverse in front of that one too. And that, although it hasn't had very much bashing around.
Is this
quite
wall, this thing here? Is this a wearing the wall?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know what it is. It's just some sort of, it's a mystery as to how that's...
Well, we're going to find out about that mystery. We're going to ask Ellen about that one.
But the splodginess in the middle of that is, this is exactly the serendipitous mistakes I was talking about earlier. That's been rolled up and printed onto silver foil and sheen collated at the same time. The word sheen collé is a printmaking term which printmaking historically has got lots of terms, you know. It's got terms coming out of its ears, really. But basically, it's laminated. Sheen collé basically just means laminated. But the silver foil is laminated onto the paper at the same time as printing the image onto that lamination. So it goes through as a sandwich in the press.
It's a sandwich.
So the silver foil gets stuck onto the backing paper at the same time as the ink.
Where does the silver foil come from?
Now this is great. That silver foil, in some cases, is baker foil, cooking foil.
Okay.
And in other cases, it's cheap Chinese Christmas wrapping paper from the corner supermarket. And we jokingly call it Factum Arte, which is this vast, great complex of studios. It's in a part of Madrid that's more. It's kind of officey, light industrially. It's not fab Madrid. I mean, Madrid is fab, but we're not in fab Madrid. We're in a bit of Madrid that's makes sense for the sort of space we need. Yeah,
It's like loose.
yeah, you know. But there are a few groovy little bars happening, which is I'm pleased to say. But up the road, round the corner, is a Chinese supermarket that sells everything from underwear to stationery and kitchenware and plastic plants and stuff. But it's nearly always got something really great to use. So we call it our local art suppliers.
Oh, nice. Which again, L would love the fact that that's what the Madrid environment throws up.
Sure. I mean, he calls it gentrifying the wood when we use something gold or silver like that. He says, "Oh, you've gentrified the wood." Yeah, well, cheap Chinese wrapping paper, mate. And he's happy about that.
Rather than pointing to all these, I happen to have one of your.
Yeah, this is a proof.
I just want you to talk about it because this is how complex this. You're talking about sheen collé and all this kind of stuff.
We should touch it really.
Maybe.
Can we get it out?
I think we can.
Because it's touchable, because it's dry. I've had lots of people have touched it already. Was it stuck on?
Nope.
People can have a. This is one of the greatest hits, really. We've done this version of.
So this is printed from that, is it? Is it an exact?
Yes, that plate.
Upright. Do you want to pass it around? Or shall we? What do you want?
It comes from the piece of wood that you see behind the plate.
It comes from the wood on the other side,
Yeah.
This one here.
Yeah, it's from that plate, and that plate is from that piece of wood the other side of that wall. This is, and if you want to touch it at some point, you can. You can feel the texture. You can actually feel it in the print. It's very, very
bark.
Yeah, like bark indeed. But whoops.
Nice, magic carpet.
It's not signed, this one, so it's not the end of the world.
It's okay. We can touch it.
This is not
It's
signed.
an Anatsui,
And I can do another one if I have to.
Chili, pass it around.
Okay.
But why I like you to see this is because this has got the below the surface print, intaglio printing. It's got surface roll printing, and it's got hand painted Chinese paper sheen collé printing. But it all happens in one hit through the press. So basically, have I done it? No.
Don't worry, you're still on.
So basically, the ink's rubbed. This very plate. The ink's rubbed into all the grooves there, and wiped off, so that the surface area, basically it's mountains and valleys here. And so you're rubbing into all the grooves, and it catches into the edges and all the groovy bits. And then you wipe it clean, and you wipe around the edges, so that's clean. and the outside perimeter is rolled up in that kind of olive colour, as is the surface. So there's blacking in the grooves, and then you roll the olivey colour all over the plate, everywhere, including over the image. So that picks up on the high points. And then all of that is printed onto a bright red hand-painted piece of Japanese paper, which is shinkolei, but I'm not going to use that word anymore because it's laminated. Right.
But I mean it's incredibly complex.
Well, it's sort of complex, but not as complex as it looks.
When we think of printing today, because we also have these new printers and these laser printers and so on, we just think it's just a jet print that's going. But in fact, what you're missing there, of course, is this what you call the information of the depth.
Oh,
the hills and valleys.
Inkjet, you're missing a lot. With printing like this, you've got presence on the paper. You've got
presence in the paper.
In the paper, on the paper. You've manipulated the paper into all the grooves and valleys.
Because once again, when I see this one here, where you have printed, you've taken a piece of L's actual bottle cloth, and you've printed over it, so you have the round piece. You've got the embossing of the metal into the paper, both on the print part and on the outside as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So you've got embossing.
So there's a presence of the actual object, Same with that one on the end there.
This one here.
That's printed from an actual piece of L's sculpture. And there's also, in the top right, there's also cheekily placed.
Yes. Top right is
an actual offcut.
A little piece of the actual machine. Yeah. To show this is a real Anatsui.
Yeah.
Now, I can only see that L, held by these 15 years of producing an absolutely amazing series. Their bottle top work is absolutely stunning. But I can only see L must have had an absolute joy.
He did seem to
enjoy himself.
Very quietly enjoy himself. He's not the most verbose gentleman, is he? No. But he makes very observant comments in an economical kind of way.
Yes.
And you kind of know when it's been approved of.
Yes.
Yeah, he lets you know that, which is lovely.
Yes.
He's very, and when it's disapproved of. He doesn't. He doesn't.
He doesn't give many words, but
yeah, he's wonderfully monosyllabic.
Yes. Okay.
I would say. Wouldn't you say, Elizabeth?
Elizabeth kind of. Well, you know him, but
you know him
many
years. All of us. But he's wonderfully monosyllabic.
Yeah, but you know what when he says yes.
Yeah, when he got it right or wrong.
Yeah.
But also, he loves to play as well. I mean, he was in the situation where, in this very room. I don't know. Have we mentioned that already? In this very room. He came once, and he wasn't able to get to Madrid, but we had some decisions that needed to be made. So I sent a box of stuff over to the gallery, and then I came over from Madrid as well, and then we all met here, Elisabeth, Elle, myself, and some other people around, and we just chucked stuff around on the floor here, literally, so that he could, this was new kind of ammunition. It's not stuff we're showing here today, actually. It was mostly the woody bits, wasn't it?
The wooden. I mean, we
had the
ladder
woody.
Here.
Yeah.
And we had the ladder here, and Elle climbed up.
Yeah, he climbed up the ladder.
And work,
he said, "Can you pass me things?" And then he chucked them over his shoulder. And then where they landed, he either said, "Yeah, or "No." And then he'd go, "Yeah." Yeah. And then so he'd kind of gently place things or reorganise things, and then we'd have to get on that ladder and take a shot straight down like that, precipitously. And then I'd take those photographs and the material back to Madrid and then piece it together in the format of however he'd thrown it around. So they're not here at the moment, but they'll future show, you'll see, must come again. There's more folks.
This is just a capsule. This is just a preview of some of the works.
We're hoping for some sort of quite a nice, juicy, large institutional show soon. So these are actually additioned to the huge number of 3 and they'll all be different anyway.
Yes.
So they won't be
That's
exactly.
not true. They'll all be different in what sense?
Well, the very nature of the plates and the way they're fabricated is that you'll never, I won't be able to repeat those exact black dots.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
So-
he wouldn't want me to. I won't be able to repeat that splodge on that one. I'll get another splodge.
You'll get another splodge,
But it won't be the same splodge.
Oh, okay.
Because that was an accident. But he liked it.
Okay.
And so I told him, I can do splodge, but I can't do the same splodge. So
I'm sure he loves that.
So there'll be 3 of those splodgy ones, but they won't all be exactly the same splodge. And in this case, this one, the wrinkles will be different each time.
Yes.
It's not always. That was a mistake as well, but one that he loved.
Okay.
But that was to do with the time of year it was printed and the circumstances in which it had to dry.
Okay.
And it
So we're talking
dried.
about these little.
Yeah,
brushes.
the foil, it wasn't ever wet, but it was on wet paper, so it couldn't dry at the same speed as the paper behind it. That's technically boring, but I mean it's why it happened, and he doesn't mind. He also doesn't mind if they're smooth.
Yeah.
So I've found a way of getting them smooth, and the rest of the edition are actually smooth. But this one's sold anyway.
Well, one of the things
good, isn't it?
we're looking at them now in a very bright light environment. But one of the things I find, which is also for me is very interesting about Anatsui's bottle top pieces, is you sit. I've got you.
Completely rubbish.
I wouldn't worry about it. You're getting excited, and that's what we want.
Well,
that's what we want.
I do get quite excited.
One of the so do I. One of the things that I like very much about Elle's bottle top pieces is there are 2 ways really to show them, and one, Elisabeth creates folds in them, and then you blast them with light, and the light and the dark give you all kinds of what you call intaglio, but we just call texture.
Yeah.
Just shadow and light and dark shadows. But the other thing, we had one Anatsui when he was starting to go from these smaller pieces to larger and larger and larger because they scale. We had one that filled the entire wall of the gallery, just one piece, made of 7 individuals that would be stitched together. So that's the same process ultimately. And rather than hanging something on the other wall, it takes me back to when Elle wanted them hung down the middle of the gallery so you could walk around it. We just put a settee on this side, so you could just sit and look at it. And during the day it would be blasted with light.
Oh, right, yeah.
But then in the evening, we'd turn all the lights out and just put a couple of little candles out.
Yeah.
And the other way to see them is just with candles, because it's a completely different piece. And the other day when the light was going
These
down,
reflect differently, yeah.
they just start
Yeah.
to twinkle in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So you don't have one Anatsui. It's the same thing. You have multiple Anatsuis depending upon the environment in which they exist.
Yeah.
And that, may I say something added to that? It's also what you were saying about permutations. Is
Yes.
that permutations, continual permutation of human energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Elves and people who did it, but also the countless hours of permutation.
Yeah.
Piercing
Sure.
a man's energy. So these are luminous symbols
Yeah,
of
indeed.
human energy, high
Indeed.
symbols.
Indeed they are, yeah. Yes, I mean the labour to make the marks, the labour to make the sculptures, then our labour in making the prints. Yeah, because it's not just pressing a button and going through a press.
No.
They're then collaged afterwards and cut and
No.
that. So there's a
And the
lot of
hours of labour to choose which one.
and
to
the
use.
build up in terms of ammo. Yeah,
Well, I love it
Ammo.
when you say ammo, because you talk about visual ammunition, which I think is great.
Yeah.
You have more to throw over your shoulder.
yeah.
Just on that, because I think we can go on, and I want to eventually let you ask some questions. You mentioned the word serendipitous, and I want to just look at Elle's. Today they have to talk about process. Can you get it yourself?
Sorry, I don't know what's
You're fine. One of the things that, first of all, I think this is a lovely exhibition because there are so many different facets of Elle on a historical. You see the early Elle in the courtyard. You see greater L's, the cassava grater L's, the wood pieces, you see the bottle top pieces, and then you see what's happening today. This is the contemporary room of some of the bottle tops and some of the graters, but what's now happening is a new bud, I think, on the Anatsui flowering tree. But the way it's extremely complex. I see a kind of a pyramid where you have a single event that is L walking in the bush in Unsuka because he's had a big lunch and he likes to go for a walk in the bush, and he comes across 3 plastic bags full of bottle tops. It's chance. It's a random encounter with something in the bush, and he opens them up and he thinks, and he takes them back to his studio and thinks, well, what can I do with that? The environment has thrown something up, and over the years he gets this number of assistants who are piercing and sending these works out all over the world, because they've gone to, I've seen them in Japan, I've seen them in the States, I've seen them in Germany, Elle has been to China, he's been everywhere. So there's one kind of chance encounter, and it becomes Elle. But then the making of these things leaves its own imprint in the real present, in the tables. And Elle later on meets a completely different kind of technological series, process, people, team, who take those, and it's as though they're kind of decoding all the Anatsuis that have ever been made, all the bottle top pieces in San Francisco, in New York, in Japan, and so on. They're decoding them, and the information of all those things is written in the wood. So you've got this. It's a sequence of associated. It's the sequence. It's history, in that sense. It's contingencies. It's absolute random, but it's not random because there's something that's putting it together. It's knotting it together. It's cause and effect, and that then he meets you and your printers, who are decoding the information. Now, there's all kinds of different kinds. Elle is very conscious that every single one of those bottle tops that he used was actually a bottle of whiskey that was drunk in a bar in Nigeria when we got drunk that night, when we were talking. Do you remember we talked about? Each of those Elle sees as a data point, a real event that happened. People met, people drank, people had an evening, and then they had a buzz, and the bottle went out, and the bottle top's there, and he collects those. So he thinks he has data on how much whiskey is drunk in Unsuka in a certain month, or whatever. Data.
Or in Factum Arte for that.
Or in Factum Arte, you know. I thought you didn't drink.
No, never got a drop.
But all these data points combine together to produce work of the most stunning quality. I mean, that's the artistic reformulation of chance events, contingency. And I think this whole show is Elle working in his own world, but with people, to create these expressions of data upon data, recuperation of recuperation, getting the work to make new works, getting the idea to make new ideas, and using again and again and again and again. So he's using bottle tops, he's using graters, he's making prints of graters, he's making prints of... It's staggering.
I mean, you could actually even, extend what's here already. I mean, there's also, apart from what gets shown and has been already signed, there's a mass of yet to be used or so far discarded, but not because of its lack of beauty, but because it wasn't relevant to whatever he was organising at the time. There's a whole another load of ammo, as I keep calling it, that could continue, or you could collage onto existing pieces, or you could change these pieces, you could recollage, you could overprint, you could churn. I mean, there will come a point when that in itself, the imagery in itself, he'll want to redigest or not. But the possibility of continuous permutation is sort of endless, really. We've only done a black and white one of that. Could do it. black and white on top of lilac.
Which is where it starts to, the whole thing starts to flower and bud.
Yeah, but also the plates themselves. If the imagery, if it comes to a point where there's a whole new load of different shaped lumps of wood that have become the currency, we could, use these plates as a piece of, it could become a piece of sculpture, or they could be collaged.
To use the plates to become sculpture. So it creates itself. It's a self-morphing, self-perpetuating.
It's a circle.
The artistic circle. Elizabeth, I'll throw it to you, and then maybe we'll ask people if they have anything to. Do you have anything to?
Well, I just want to say it's not a project that's finished. When Elle was there last time, which was in the autumn, he had to go and give a talk in Paris. And then when he was in Paris, he said, "Oh my God, I'm so sad I left. I would have rather stayed in Madrid and continued the experiment and the project." So I'm sure it's not needed, and whenever he has a chance, we'll be there and work on it.
Do some more.
Yeah, do some more.
That'd be great.
Anything from the floor, please? John.
What has been impressed on me again this afternoon is the extent to which indigenous art everywhere, all over the world, has come to rely inexorably on the effluvia of technology and of affluence, and the extent to which local economies and politics are likewise. And we have come to rely upon the accidental. We have become a vast cargo cult in which we are convinced that whatever we need is going to magically drop out of the sky. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I love this idea of the accidental, self-perpetuating. Yeah.
I think most serious artists or printmakers that use the palette of printmaking aren't necessarily in it for the point of reproduction. It can be reproduced. I could do 35 of those, but it's about the palette of printmaking, and this has thrown up a slightly different edge to that palette. That's what's got me tuned into it. It's it's the fact that it's extended my palette of printmaking as well as Elle's, because we've been making it up as we go along, and we're not relying that heavily on techniques that are tried and tested. So that's that kind of attitude to it has been one of the blossomings of it, actually.
Well, I love the fact that you're introducing Elle to an ancient Japanese takuzuri technique, which Elle, as a teacher of sculpture and things, probably hasn't met before. But I can see that Elle is fascinated by printing.
Well, it's foot in the past, foot in the future, and foot in the whatever's happening now, whatever that is,
Yes.
all at once.
Yes. And this is a contemporary show of that. I think that's absolutely right.
Is there somewhere where we can actually see a print being made?
There's a
Can you
little.
repeat the question?
Is there somewhere we could see a print being made?
Do you want to come and fly out to Madrid? I'm going next Tuesday. You'd be very welcome. It's probably a slightly expensive way. Actually, it's not. It's cheaper than going from here to Brighton.
If you look at that little, if you look at that little video, which is just
There
around
is
the
a little
corner,
video around there.
it has a little. It has a few
There are some
snippets.
images of inking up the.
And it also
thing.
shows his assistants making holes into the wooden boards.
Yeah, it's quite.
Kind of has a little bit of that process.
But the practicalities are that you have a plate like over your shoulder there, and you rub ink into it or roll ink onto it, or both, and then you place paper on top of it that is dampened so that it's supple enough to get pushed into the grooves, and then you put it through an etching press, which is basically a mangle, a glorified mangle. Which applies pressure with some blankets which are sympathetic to the paper. We have rather expensive but very soft blankets that help that pressure be applied in a aggressive way, as it were, in
Yeah.
a subtle way,
Yeah.
to pick up detail.
Mhm.
And then that's it. I mean, the actual practicalities of making the print aren't rocket science at all. I mean, experience helps you do it better. But
So do you do all the different layers at one time?
not always. No, sometimes it's in several goes. But in most cases here, yeah, it's all in one hit. Except for these, there are pieces collaged on top in
Yeah.
these, so that they float. So they are printed in the same way, but then they're cut out and there's a little tag behind them to make them pop up.
Okay.
But yeah, actually, in most cases, the coloured background and the main feature, it's all printed in one
Right.
hit. I mean, you've got to ink up different bits, and
Yeah.
the preamble to it going through the press is perhaps a bit fiddly. But once it's on the press, you just go through the press. So it takes about 30 seconds.
No, but it's in the composition of that sandwich that goes through the press, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
sort of.
yeah, we're not exactly pret-a-manger.
No,
We're a bit more bespoke than that.
in the silver one there.
Yeah.
Is there also a single gold circle that comes through or something?
I think that's the light helping us there.
That's the light helping. Okay, yeah.
No, it's plain. That's baker
that's
foil.
silver.
That's
That's silver,
your
yeah.
baker foil, mate.
So it's really it's a collaborative show. I mean, you're very, as
Yeah.
far as the choices on color and
Yeah.
that was not Elle, that was you making those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would enjoy calling it a collaboration.
Yeah,
with Elle.
it's a much.
We've all worked pretty hard, yeah. But you know, initially it's like offering him something from which to, a palette from which to make these. I mean, it's not. I haven't made final decisions anywhere, but I've made lots of decisions in the sense in terms of what we offer him. And then, initially, and then based on his comments on that, I've educated those offerings, tuned into what he would have first commented upon in the first bunch, So yeah, I mean, it is a collaboration, I would say so. Yeah. And then Elisabeth too. I mean, she's been there, at the point of making as well. And Constanza, who's not here, which is a shame, she's in Madrid. She's had to go back to Madrid. She's working on something, and she's a big part of it as well. Another young lady who works with us, very clever.
So what's you're presenting a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What's the things was he rejected?
Well,
or was there anything really part of your thinking that wasn't working? That things that you were trying?
there were some things. Yeah, there were certain things I was quite surprised. There was one where I wanted to do. Actually, I was probably trying a bit too hard. I made a whole set of repeats of one thing, thinking he might want to do a linked thing, exactly like his thing. So I repeated and I made a pile of some. Do you remember? Linking piles of the smaller shapes. Some of the shapes he sent us were quite small, little kind of triangular bits, and I thought, yeah, they're not big features in terms of imagery, but they could be great as passive links between exciting areas and other exciting areas, and that hasn't really happened yet. No. So in that sense, yeah, he didn't go for that, or he might in the future, but he didn't go for it straight away. He wanted sort of quite rich, tightly packed things. I thought he might want to, because some of the really huge ones, there's large areas of sort of gentle, passive colour, and then a burst of busyness, And I was trying to emulate that for him, but he didn't necessarily go for that. But I think because he wants to have something that's a bit getting away from that. It's linked, literally. I mean, that word links kind of a cliche amongst this thing, but it's linked big time. But it's not visually overly associated with the.
But also, in terms of a printing press, you have a particular size.
Yeah, that's yes.
So that's also. Whereas Elle begins with plots that would fit on this wall, but then because they can be sewn together, they get larger and larger and larger until they're covering the Royal Academy.
Yeah,
they're covering buildings. Because they can be sewn together. So you're already thinking in terms of links as something that makes.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the case of this, I mean, that's a bit like the
sort of thing,
a repetitive thing, but it ended up being quite nice as fairly simple. I mean, that's the sort of front and back of a cassava grater. So some are the pointy side and some of the flatter side, and so there's slight variations in terms of the texture. But they're printed. I do printed 3 at a time, then they're pieced together. I could probably print 6 at a time, just about on the press, maybe even 9. I could get through. But you know, in terms of paper doing funny things in the press, if you've got a very large piece of paper going through a press with a lot of texture, the paper doesn't know what to do with itself. It gets a bit awkward and creases and kind of. I always call it. It sort of does that. You know, it kind of gnarls its lip at you. You know, it kind of wants to rivulate as it goes through, and then it folds over itself. Rob will have had some.
Rivulate's not the word.
No, rivulate's all over the place, mate. It's all don't like rivulation. But I think Rob would know what I mean by this. But you know, paper under pressure, you have to respect it. You know. So I did it in sections in that case. That's actually paper, but it's mounted onto aluminium sheet to give it a bit of beef, so you can hang it like that. You know.
Well, knowing how much El loves media, I'm sure that he's learnt a huge amount about the process of printing, which we know so little about in when you see these. I mean, I've become very conscious of the fact that printing is actually, it needs looking at, the actual printing, producing it. It's very complex.
I'm not in it for reproduction. I'm in it for what it can give us. Which isn't about making 60 of the same thing look exactly the same. It's about what you're getting from the palette of printmaking.
But that's what Elle is fascinated by too. It's the serendipitous arrival of something because it was a wet day and the other thing didn't get the same thing, and so you get this. It's Elle is looking for that serendipity. Isn't
Well, that's how that was me being stupid. But it turned out rather nicely. But, I'd got it all ready to go on the press, and I laid the foil down to spray the back, and before it went into the press, and the surface I laid it onto had some little drops of water on it, and the ink is oil based, and ink and oil and water don't mix. So when it goes to the press, the water's rejecting the ink, but in a really rather lovely cloudy sort of way, which is why I won't be able to repeat it exactly. But I can make it. I can sort of get splodgy bits, but there'll be different splodgy bits.
But I think that's like in art. You know, when you get it wrong, then it might be right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We've always got that excuse travelling with us.
Well,
It's true. When it falls,
as long as you spotted it, as long as you tuned it enough to spot.
Hanging Elle's work the other day there, you know, and it just slipped out of somebody's hand, and then it was right, you know, because it got it wrong. You know, it fell out, and then you hit it. You hit that. You just have to see it.
Yeah, you have
to see that moment when it's right. Although it looks wrong.
Yeah.
I think I see the moment when we close this and maybe talk amongst ourselves later. But thank you very much for. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.